They kicked me out during cancer treatment, and I never saw it coming. But what they didn't know was that I had the power to buy the very house they thought they owned. Get comfortable, because this story isn't just about abandonment, it's about turning weakness into strength. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will remind you that family loyalty works both ways. My name is Eleanor. I'm 62 years old, and until 6 months ago, I believed blood was thicker than water. I raised my son Michael as a single mother after his father walked out when he was 3. I worked 2 jobs, missed sleep, skipped meals, all so he could have everything he needed: piano lessons, baseball uniforms, college tuition. I gave him my life piece by piece, and I never regretted a single sacrifice. When Michael met Jessica, I wanted to be happy for him. She was beautiful, ambitious, came from money, everything I thought he deserved. But from the moment I met her, I felt something cold in her smile. The way she looked at my modest house, my second-hand furniture, my calloused hands, like I was something that needed to be managed. The wedding was beautiful, expensive. I offered to help pay, but Jessica's parents insisted on handling everything. I sat in the 3rd row, not the first, watching my son marry a woman who had already started erasing me from his life. During the reception, when I tried to give a speech, Jessica whispered something to Michael. He walked over and gently took the microphone from my hand. "Maybe later, Mum," he said. Later never came. After they married, the visits became less frequent, phone calls shorter. I told myself it was normal. Young couples need space to build their life together. But space became distance, and distance became something that felt like abandonment. When they bought their first house, a beautiful colonial in the suburbs, I wasn't invited to the housewarming. I found out about it from Facebook. I tried to bridge the gap. I'd send care packages, remember birthdays, offer babysitting for the grandchildren that never came. Jessica was always polite, always had an excuse. "We're so busy with work, maybe next month. The holidays are just crazy this year." I became an expert at reading between the lines of rejection. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Stage 2, treatable but serious. The doctor's words echoed in my head as I sat in the parking lot of the medical center, hands shaking, wondering who to call first. There was only one person I wanted: my son. When I told Michael, his voice cracked. He promised to be there for every appointment, every treatment. For 3 days, I felt like I had my son back. Then Jessica got involved. She called me directly, which she never did. "Eleanor," she said, her voice sweet as poison, "I think it would be better if you stayed with your sister during treatment. You need family support, and we're just so overwhelmed with work right now." I didn't have a sister. She knew that. Michael knew that. But when I pointed it out, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then she said something that I'll never forget. "Sometimes we have to make difficult choices about where to focus our energy." I'm sure you understand. I understood perfectly. I wasn't family anymore. I was an obligation they wanted to transfer to someone else, anyone else. The chemotherapy was brutal. I lost my hair, my appetite, my strength. But worst of all, I lost hope. Michael called once a week, sometimes twice. Jessica never got on the phone. He'd ask how I was feeling, promise to visit soon, then disappear back into his life with her. I spent months sitting in waiting rooms alone, getting treatments alone, going home to an empty house alone. But cancer has a way of clarifying things. When you're fighting for your life, you realize who's really fighting with you and who's just watching from the sidelines. And I realized something else. I wasn't going to die forgotten. I wasn't going to let them erase me without consequences. During my recovery, I did something I hadn't done in years. I started paying attention to my finances, really paying attention. You see, when Michael's father left, I didn't just work 2 jobs, I invested. Every spare dollar went into stocks, bonds, retirement accounts. I lived like I was poor, so that one day I could live like I wasn't. By the time I beat cancer, I had accumulated more wealth than Michael and Jessica could imagine. But money wasn't enough. I needed information. So I hired a private investigator. What I discovered about Jessica's family, about their finances, about their perfect suburban life, gave me everything I needed to plan my next move. Jessica's father owned a chain of upscale restaurants. The family's wealth was built on image, reputation, social connections. But underneath the polished exterior, there were cracks, tax problems, labor disputes, a business hanging by a thread. One bad news cycle could bring it all down. That's when I developed my strategy. I wasn't going to attack them directly. I was going to remove myself so completely from their lives that they'd finally understand what they'd lost. But first, I was going to make sure they knew exactly who they'd underestimated. I started with Michael's college loans. He still owed $40,000, payments that stretched his budget thin every month. I paid them off anonymously through a third party. When he called to tell me about the mysterious benefactor who had cleared his debt, I acted surprised. "How wonderful," I said. "You deserve some good luck." Next, I purchased the small accounting firm where Jessica worked as a junior partner. She had no idea that her new boss was acting on my instructions. Her workload doubled. Her hours increased. Her stress levels went through the roof. When she complained to Michael about the toxic work environment, I felt a small satisfaction. Now she knew what it felt like to be undervalued. But the real game began when their house went into foreclosure. Michael had been struggling with the mortgage payments ever since his hours were cut at work. Jessica's reduced income from her increasingly demanding job didn't help. They were about to lose everything they'd worked for, everything they'd prioritized over me. I made them an offer through my lawyer. I would buy their house, allow them to rent it back at below market rate, with an option to repurchase in 5 years. They were desperate enough to agree without asking too many questions about their mysterious benefactor. For 6 months, I was their landlord, and they had no idea. I watched through property management reports as they struggled to make even the reduced rent payments. I saw how the stress affected their marriage, how Jessica started working longer hours, how Michael picked up a second job. They were experiencing something they'd never known before: real financial pressure. The reports painted a picture of a couple falling apart. Late rent payments, noise complaints from neighbors about arguments, requests for maintenance that revealed how they were cutting corners. Jessica had stopped getting her nails done, something she'd never missed since I'd known her. Michael was driving for a rideshare company on weekends, something he'd once said was beneath college graduates. I found myself checking the reports obsessively, looking for signs of how they were coping. Part of me felt guilty watching their decline, but a bigger part felt vindicated. This was what struggle looked like. This was what I'd lived with for years while building the wealth they now needed. The property manager mentioned that other tenants had reported seeing Jessica crying in the laundry room. Michael had been spotted sitting in his car in the parking lot for hours, just staring at nothing. They were learning what it felt like to have your life controlled by forces you couldn't see or understand. But the most satisfying report came in month 5. The property manager noted that they'd started spending more time at home instead of going out. Their social media posts, which I occasionally checked, had gone from dinner parties and weekend trips to quiet nights in and grocery store sales. The life Jessica had built on image and appearances was crumbling, and she had no idea I was pulling every string. That's when Jessica made her biggest mistake. She called me. Eleanor, she said, her voice different now, smaller. I know we haven't been close, but we're going through a difficult time. Michael doesn't want to ask, but we could really use some help. Could you possibly lend us some money? I let the silence stretch between us. How much do you need? I asked. 20,000 would change everything for us, she said. We'd pay it back, of course. I'm sorry, I said. I don't have that kind of money. I'm on a fixed income, you know. Maybe you should ask your family for help. The conversation ended quickly after that. But the next day, I received a text from Michael. Mum, I heard Jessica called you. I'm sorry she put you in that position. I know you'd help if you could. The assumption stung that I was too poor, too irrelevant to make a difference in their lives. They still didn't see me. Even when they needed me, they couldn't imagine I might have power. That weekend, I drove to their house. My house, technically. I sat in my car across the street and watched Michael mow the lawn, watched Jessica water plants on the porch. They looked tired, stressed, older than their years. Part of me wanted to walk up those steps, reveal everything, and make it all better. But a bigger part of me knew they needed to learn something first. I waited 2 more weeks. Then I had my lawyer send them an eviction notice. Their mysterious landlord was selling the property and needed them out in 30 days. No exceptions, no extensions. When Michael called me, crying about losing the house, I listened with what I hoped sounded like genuine sympathy. That's terrible, sweetheart, I said. Where will you go? I don't know, he said, his voice breaking. Jessica's parents can't help. Her dad's restaurants are in trouble. We've looked at apartments, but our credit is shot. Mom, I don't know what we're going to do. We might have to live in our car. The desperation in his voice was real. This was no longer about teaching a lesson. This was about watching my son face homelessness because of choices he'd made, choices I'd orchestrated. For a moment, I almost broke, almost revealed everything and fixed it all. But then I remembered sitting alone in those chemotherapy chairs, and I hardened my heart. This was the moment I had been building toward. The moment when my son would finally ask for what he should have offered years ago. Would you like to stay with me? I asked quietly. There was a pause. Really? You'd do that? Of course, I said. You're my son. You're always welcome in my home. When they moved in, Jessica was different, humbled. She helped with dishes, asked about my health, even complimented my cooking. But I could see the resentment behind her smile. This wasn't her choice. It was her only option. For 3 weeks, we lived in an uneasy truce. They slept in my guest room, ate my food, used my Wi-Fi. Jessica Job searched from my kitchen table while Michael worked his 2 part-time jobs. They were polite, grateful, and completely unaware that I controlled their entire situation. But I wasn't done teaching them lessons. I wanted them to understand the full weight of what they'd done to me. So one evening, as we sat around the dinner table like a family, I made an announcement. I have something to tell you both, I said. I've been thinking about my will, about what happens to my estate when I'm gone. Michael looked uncomfortable. Mom, you don't need to worry about that now. Actually, I do, I said. I've decided to leave everything to charity. The house, my savings, my investments. I want to make sure it goes to people who truly need it. The silence was deafening. Jessica's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Michael stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Everything? He asked finally. Everything, I confirmed. There are so many people in this world who have no family to depend on. People who face illness alone, who struggle without support. I want my money to help them. Jessica excused herself from the table. I could hear her whispering urgently to Michael in the hallway. When they returned, Michael's face was pale. "Mom," he said, "I think we need to talk." This was it. The moment when they would finally see me, finally understand what they'd lost. But instead of the apology I'd waited years to hear, Michael said something that shattered whatever hope I had left. "I think it might be best if we found somewhere else to stay," he said. "This arrangement isn't working for anyone." I looked at Jessica. She couldn't meet my eyes. "Of course," I said. "I understand." That night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and my laptop. I transferred ownership of their house back to them, anonymously. I deposited enough money in Michael's account to cover his debts, and Jessica's too. I even arranged for Jessica to receive a promotion at work through the company I owned. But I also did something else. I wrote them a letter explaining everything. Every investment, every anonymous payment, every carefully orchestrated event that had brought them to my doorstep. I told them about the private investigator, about the accounting firm, about being their landlord. I explained how I'd orchestrated their financial crisis, and then waited to see if they would choose family over pride. I sealed the letter in an envelope and left it on the kitchen counter with their names on it. Then I packed a suitcase and drove to the airport. I'd booked a one-way ticket to Seattle, where I'd always wanted to live. I left behind the house where I'd raised my son, the neighborhood where I'd built my life, and the family that had already left me long ago. The next morning, from my hotel room 3,000 miles away, I received a call from Michael. He was crying so hard I could barely understand him. "Mum, where are you?" "The letter. I don't understand. Please come home. We need to talk." I let him cry. I let him beg. I let him apologize for things he didn't even remember doing. And then I said the words I'd been practicing for months. "Michael, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm done trying to prove my worth to people who can't see it. You made your choice when you chose your wife over your mother. You made it again when you chose your pride over your family. I'm making mine now." He called 17 times that day. Jessica called too, her voice broken, pleading. They sent emails, texts, messages through mutual friends. They even flew to Seattle to find me, but I'd already moved on. I bought a small cottage by the water, enrolled in art classes, made new friends who knew nothing about my past. 6 months later, I received a photo in the mail. Michael and Jessica holding a baby, their first child. On the back, Jessica had written, "Her name is Eleanor Rose. We hope someday you'll meet her." I stared at that photo for hours. This tiny person who carried my name but would never know my story. I wondered if they'd tell her about her grandmother, or if I'd become another family secret, another uncomfortable truth swept under the rug. I called my lawyer the next day. I wanted to set up a trust fund for Eleanor Rose, something she could access when she turned 18. Money for college, for her first home, for whatever dreams she might have. But there was a condition. She would only receive the inheritance if she came to find me herself, as an adult, without her parents' knowledge. I wanted her to have a choice that Michael never gave me, the choice to know her grandmother on her own terms, not through the filter of her parents' guilt and resentment. I hung the photo on my refrigerator and smiled. Not because I was forgiven, but because I was finally free. Free from the exhausting work of loving people who took that love for granted. Free from the hope that someday they'd see me the way I saw them. They'd named their daughter after me, but it was too late. I'd already learned the most important lesson of my life. Sometimes the only way to teach someone your value is to take it away completely. And sometimes when you do that, you discover that you're worth more than they ever imagined. I still live by the water. I paint landscapes now, sell them at local galleries. I volunteer at a cancer support centre, helping other women navigate treatment without family support. I've built a life that doesn't depend on anyone's approval or anyone's love. Michael sends letters sometimes, updates about the baby, apologies for the past, invitations to visit. I read them all, but I don't respond. Not because I don't love him, but because love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just habit. Maybe someday I'll meet my granddaughter. Maybe someday Michael will understand why I had to leave to finally be seen. But until then, I'm content knowing that the woman who used to beg for scraps of attention from her own family now owns her own life completely. They thought they could make me disappear. Instead, I learned how to make myself impossible to forget. And that, more than any apology, is worth everything I left behind. Comment below if you've ever had to choose between your dignity and your family. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will remind you that sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do.